Okay, I have 6 o'clock. Okay, so welcome to the March 18th, 2021 West Sac Planning Commission meeting. We continue to meet via teleconference pursuant to Governor's Executive Order N2920. Members of the Planning Commission and staff are participating via live video conference to reduce the spread of COVID-19. Members of the public have been invited to watch the meeting via wave cable on our local channel 20 or streaming online through the city's website. Members of the public have also been invited to participate via Zoom. Tonight's agenda and all agenda item materials are available on the city's website on the Planning Commission page. All public comments submitted by 5 p.m. via email to the Planning Commission clerk are available for consideration and are posted on the city website, along with the agenda and link to the live streaming video of this meeting. The public has also been invited to participate in the meeting via the Zoom meeting link and may make oral comments during the meeting. The commission clerk will note the commenters for each item. So with that, we'll proceed to tonight's agenda. And first up is General Administration Function, Part 1A, presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda within the commission's jurisdiction. Let's see, Mr. Mierzwiak, do we have any public commenters for 1A?
We have no comments on this item.
So moving to item 1B, correspondence and staff communications from the Planning Commission Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Chair Sablon. I do have a few items to note for you tonight that we'll get into in greater depth as we proceed into the agenda. You should have received 2 separate memos regarding two of the items tonight. One from Seamus Laffey, another one from Kathy Allen. We'll address those in more detail with respect to those each items. And I also believe we received some public comment on at least one of the items tonight as well. So we will address that when we get to that particular item. Speaking of your agenda, item number 5, which is the one related to the fueling stations in the ML zone. Staff will be requesting a continuance of that item this evening. So what we would request, just for efficiency purposes, on that item, and especially for the applicants, is that we would, if the commission is so inclined to grant a continuance to that matter, we would take that up as your first item on your regular agenda, address that matter, and then proceed with the rest of the items. That way the applicants who are related to that, who are on the phone tonight, don't have to stay on the call all night while we take care of our other business. So that will be staff's request, and we'll help facilitate that once we get to regular agenda. That concludes staff communications at this time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Tilley. So moving on to General Administration Function Part 1C, disclosure of ex parte communications. Do any of the commissioners have any ex parte communications to disclose? I'm not seeing any hands. I know Commissioner Middleman, you don't have the raise hand function. Looks like you don't have any either. Okay, so with that, we'll move to the consent agenda. If do commissioners want to pull any items from the consent agenda? Let's see, I have 2 raised hands. Let's see, Commissioner Escobar.
Sorry, my question was more on the logistics. If we have anyone from the public that wants to make a public comment on item number 5, that we haven't yet took a motion to table, what would you recommend for that?
I think Mr. Tilley, I think you're on mute.
Mr. City Attorney, would you please address Commissioner Escobar's question?
So you could take public comment and then choose to move the rest of the discussion to a future date, but I think staff is not really prepared today to give the full presentation, and so it may be premature to even take public comment.
And Mr. Mierzwiak, do you know if we have any public commenters on the line for that item?
I do not believe we have any commenters on the line for that item.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Then Commissioner Hirsch?
Thank you, Chair Sablon. I actually would like to remove item 2 from the consent agenda, if that's okay.
Okay. So we're going to pull item 2, and I believe that's Miss Allen's item. Okay, so we will move that to the regular agenda.
Thank you.
Do we have a motion for the remaining item on the consent agenda?
A motion. Second.
Mr. Mierzwick, can you do the roll call, please?
Commissioner Lockhart,
Aye.
Commissioner Middleman,
Aye.
Commissioner Esquivel,
Aye.
Commissioner Hirsch,
Aye.
Commissioner Steger,
Aye.
Commissioner Berliner,
Aye.
Chair Sablon.
Aye. Thank you. Motion passes. So we now are moving on to the regular agenda. We've moved item 2 from the consent agenda over the KIND project multifamily development parking area enhancements. I will open up to Commissioner Hirsch. It was your request to remove it.
Well, thank you, Chair Sablon, but I know if we have people on for item 5, I'd be happy maybe skipping ahead to item 5, if that's okay. And then if the commission, of course, does the staff recommended action and then going back to item 2.
Right. Thank you for the reminder. Mr. Tilley, do we need a motion for that, or can we just move?
Yes, you would need a motion to continue item 5. I know we had a bit of a discrepancy on the numbering, so I want to make sure it's clear we are talking about the proposed zone text amendments related to fueling stations in the ML zone.
In that case, Chair Sablon, I'll move to continue item 5 to the next meeting.
And I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Mierzwick, can you do the roll call, please?
Commissioner Middleman,
Aye.
Commissioner Lockhart,
Aye.
Commissioner Steger,
Aye.
Commissioner Berliner,
Aye.
Commissioner Esquivel,
Aye.
Commissioner Hirsch,
Aye.
Chair Sablon.
Aye.
And just in case anyone is watching the live stream, that meeting date it will be April 1st.
Thank you, Mr. Tilley. And thank you for the reminder, Commissioner Hirsch. So we will move on to item 2 that was moved from the consent agenda, the KIND project multifamily development parking area enhancements.
Evening, Chair Sablon and members of the commission. Just as a little background for the commission, as quite a lot has gone on with this project prior to you all being installed in the commission. This project includes 148 studio apartments, which will be located in 2 buildings at the southwest corner of 4th and F Streets, which is located in the Washington Specific Plan area. It's located in the waterfront zone, which is intended for high intensity mixed uses. In addition to the buildings, it includes such recreational amenities as an outdoor gym, dog area, veggie planter, outdoor grills, and ping pong tables. It also includes a parking lot with 39 parking spaces. The Planning Commission did act on this item on November 19th and approved its land use entitlements, which included the design for the project, as well as some minor deviations from the Washington Specific Plan. Also on November 19th, the zoning administrator approved a parking reduction for the project, which reduced the number of parking spaces for the project from 68 to 39. The Planning Commission also adopted PC Resolution 20-13 PC, which recommended that the City Council approve a development agreement for the project, and the City Council did approve the project's DA on January 20th. One item contained in the DA did relate to the project's surface parking lot. It contains a requirement that the developer construct enhanced screening elements for the project, and the text for that portion of the DA was put in your staff report. And the developer did submit the project enhancements. We did put an attachment in your staff report that showed what they're proposing. They're proposing powder-coated welded steel framing, which is 3 feet 8 inches high, and the panels are 35 feet long. The panel sections will alternate between plain sections and decorative sections. There will be taller landscaping planted in front of the plain sections and low landscaping in front of the decorative sections. There will also be tall shrubs planted in front of each of the panel sections in the areas between where they meet. The panels are located along 4th Street to provide screening of the parking area from that side. The items as presented by the developer do meet the city standards on height through the landscaping guidelines and the location. This concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions for you. I would also like to note that the developer is here should you have any questions of her, along with Ms. Richards from the Economic Development Department, who spearheaded the development agreement portion of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Do any of the commissioners have questions of staff at this point? Okay, Commissioner Hirsch.
Well, thank you, Chair Sablon, and thank you, Ms. Allen, for that presentation. The reason I pulled this item is just because I am not quite as familiar with it as some of the returning commissioners who've previously seen it, and I had some difficulty getting an understanding of these enhancements from the diagram on the virtual PDF staff packet that was sent out. Is it possible, could you pull up what the enhancements look like so I can get a better understanding of the visual when you describe the 35 by 3.5 foot tall panels?
Ben, can you pull up that page from the staff report at all?
I'm working on it. What page did you say it was on?
Just a moment.
From what I have, I think it's on page 33 of the staff packet.
Just let me know when I think we're right here.
No, I think a little further down. It's just before attachment 6. It's the last page of attachment 5.
Second to last page in the report.
Yes, that's what I was looking at. And I was just having trouble looking at it on the virtual PDF that I had. So thank you for pulling it up. And a couple of questions that I have, understanding that the item before us today is just to confirm that the enhancements comply with the city's standards. But I'm trying to get a better sense, especially of the bottom part of this page. You know, one of the aspects that I think is really great about this project, from my understanding of what I read, is that it's very community oriented. The floor units open up into the community. And so, you know, I have a little concern about walling off large sections of the block when it's separating the sidewalk from outdoor space. and was wondering, how much of it was decorative versus how much of it was just a tall black gate. And I don't know, Ms. Allen, if you or the applicant might be able to explain, since it's a little hard to see from the diagram.
Well, the panels alternate from plain panels, which will have tall vegetation in front of them, and decorative panels. So every other one is decorative. And then between each section of the 35-foot panels are going to be these larger shrubs, which is basically what you see in the bottom portion of this exhibit here. So I didn't get that. Could you try again? So basically, we're just trying to screen off the parking area and put something more attractive looking than just a bunch of cars in a lot for people at the street level to look at.
I see. And is there any setback between this fencing and the sidewalk, or is this right up against it?
Julie, do you remember if?
Yes, Kathy, if I may, thank you. Commissioner Hirsch, yes, there is some setback because there is vegetation in areas between the screening itself and the sidewalk.
That's very helpful.
Thank you. And I believe your question really was addressing access as well as the beautification and making sure that there's balance between those elements, since we did work very hard to make the residential have street appeal and be approachable so that it felt really connected to the community. This was really a site consideration that was made to really ensure that we were ticking all the boxes relative to the whole site holistically. So water retention, basically making sure we had adequate parking, making sure that we were providing primarily a wonderful guest and resident experience, and also a very deliberate connection to the community. Also solar, the orientation of the buildings and the parking and everything are really ideally situated to capture the solar component of our project. So everything that is being recommended has been done with several steps of consideration to each element to bring the project to its highest and best.
No, thank you, Ms. Young. That's very helpful information to have. And I know today we're not revisiting the whole item, but just the parking enhancement. So I wanted to make sure I had a proper understanding. But from what I've heard today and from what I've read of the project, this sounds like an incredible affordable housing project for the neighborhood. So I just wanted to make sure that it was fully integrated and not walled off with the existing residents, and it wasn't an effort of gentrification, but more one that fits in with the community and allows the residents of the Kind project to truly integrate. So
thank you.
With that, my concerns have been met. Thank you. And thank you, Chair Sablan.
Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have any other questions? Okay. I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, so I'll just bring it back to the commission for any deliberation or a motion at this point.
I'll move the staff's recommended action, Chair Sablan.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Mr. Mearswick, can you do the roll call, please?
Commissioner Esquivel?
Aye.
Commissioner Hirsch?
Aye.
Commissioner Lockhart?
Aye.
Commissioner Steger?
Aye.
Commissioner Berliner?
Aye. Sorry.
Commissioner Middleman?
Aye.
Chair Sablan?
Aye. Thank you. Motion passes. So we will move on to item 3 on the regular agenda. And that is the public hearing regarding 3245 Marshall Road, tentative parcel map 5250. We'll have the staff presentation by Mr. Hardy.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the Planning Commission. This item before you was a continuation from September 17th, where it was a 10-acre parcel that was divided up into a 4-lot equal distributed 2.5 acre lots. So the tentative parcel map 5205 in 4 equal parts in the RE rural core area residential estates. It all has public access or easements as needed. To provide that, it will connect to water service. It will be on septic as there isn't any close connection for that service for the city, which is permissible given the size of the properties. It's just division of the properties into 4 equal parcels. No additional development at this time is coming forth with it. At the September 17th meeting, the conditions of approval stated that the power lines would be undergrounded in accordance to the goals and policies of the general plan for resiliency. And the zoning ordinance also further refines that. However, the applicant did present and request the commission to waive that requirement. And at the deliberation of the Planning Commission, staff was directed to provide some alternative research to bring back to the commission for consideration of other possible ways to address the undergrounding. In doing so, we researched 3 different programs, CFD, which is essentially established by Mello-Roos is the more common name, which we traditionally use in the city for landscape lighting districts and including other infrastructure. The BOLD program and the SKIP program, due to the size of the project and the overall cost, after discussing it with the finance director and the BOLD and SKIP program correspondence, the project just doesn't meet the threshold that is required because there is quite a bit of administration of setting it up and return on investment. It's just too small of a project, and combining it into another district that's already established would take a vote to do so. So as part of that review and direction, I know only 2 of the current members of the commission were at that meeting. So the direction that we researched is what the action is in the report, what the implications were in terms of the goals and policies and objectives, and then the comment in terms of what it ultimately ends up leaving. The commission did have quite a bit of discussion and didn't ultimately decide to either waive the requirements or not waive the requirements. But I will go through the list just for the background. So if all the items are waived, the polls would remain consistent as they are. And then at some future time, staff would, or the city would have to develop money or other private entity that would be a lineage between the 2 projects, conditioned to underground them at some future date. The cost of that goes up each year as typical, but the full bear of the cost more than likely would be on the city. It wouldn't advance any of our resiliency goals, any power fluctuations as last wind storm we had. Most of the power outages were due to above ground power versus below. the option the applicant came forth is to underground 2 of the poles. There's a total of 5. You know, the code does still require, per our recommendation, of full undergrounding, but there is a section that does allow the commission to waive that. The applicant is proposing to underground 2 of the middle poles along the Marshall frontage. This does advance our resiliency goals. It does underground some of the poles, and the cost would be less expensive for those 2 poles, as they don't have the transformers or provide power up Golden Gate to another pole up there. So the other option, as staff has recommended, was full undergrounding. It proceeds in advancing all our goals and policies and objectives of resiliency and safety as well, by keeping that power consistent. All the findings can be made for the map itself. And with that, we are prepared to any of the alternatives in the report to pivot on that. We're also prepared to address the applicant's request at the discretion of the commission. The applicant is online, as well as Mark Collier, for staff to address any of the commission's concerns. That concludes my report. If there's any questions or comments for myself, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. Do the commissioners have any questions for staff at this time? Okay. Commissioner Steger.
Yes, thank you, Chair Sablan. So quickly, and forgive me if I missed this in the staff's report, but if the applicant undergrounds 2 of the 5 poles, is there any indication on what the city's cost of the, to underground the remaining 3 poles? Would any idea what that cost would be?
Mark, do you have the ability to?
Yeah, Mark, are you able to ballpark that?
The cost of the pole removal isn't really the issue. It's the lines themselves, and the poles that we're talking about leaving in place are very near the boundaries of the map. On the west end, the pole that would remain in place is right at the intersection of Marshall and Otis. And if we were to remove that pole, you'd actually have to put another new pole in on the opposite side of Otis. So you really wouldn't, you'd still have the same number of poles. The only thing you'd gain would be undergrounding the crossing of Otis Avenue, which would be an offsite obligation of this project. On the east side, the 2 poles that we're talking about leaving in place, which are probably 15 feet apart from each other, are probably 50 to 75 feet in from her property boundary. Again, unless you were to go 100 to 200 feet beyond her project boundary to the next existing pole, you would be putting another pole in. So leaving the poles in place isn't a big cost savings. It's the cost of undergrounding the power lines is where the cost is found, and the applicant's actually proposing to do that. So effectively, what she's proposing is to underground the power lines across the vast majority of her entire frontage.
Okay, I think my understanding is incorrect. And my understanding was that there were 5 poles total that needed to be removed and undergrounded power line wise. The applicant is offering to take care of the cost for 2 of the 5 poles, right? Which the remaining cost would be on the city, right? To underground the remaining 3 poles and power lines. Is my understanding
Right.
correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
But I'm saying the cost isn't in the poles themselves, it's in the power lines and the conduit that replaces the power lines.
Got it. Okay. Okay, thank you.
If the benefit of the commission, I do have an aerial that designates which poles to be removed and which ones remain. If the commission wishes to see that graphic, we can pull that up.
I think that would be beneficial.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I
Thank you.
agree.
Ben, can you get that up, please?
So as you can see, the 2 poles undergrounded I have labeled, and the 3 poles to remain, as Mark alluded to, the vast majority of the power overhead lines would be undergrounded from essentially Golden Gate to the corner Otis.
Right. So the difference in complete undergrounding of her project, which would mean if you look at the west side over there by Otis, you'd have to put another pole on the west side of Otis Avenue, undergrounding offside of her project across Otis Avenue. So you'd have a new pole that doesn't exist now. And then on the east side, you'd have a new pole located on her property line, making up a difference of, I don't know, however many feet that is. It's not that far. You're not really gaining a lot. I mean, with what we're proposing, or what she's proposing, I'm sorry, you're getting the vast majority of the project underground. It's actually, you have to have a transition somewhere between the overhead and the underground. And with keeping those poles in place, it's a reasonable transition point.
Thank you.
Without actually adding new poles that aren't there now.
Okay, thank you.
And in doing so, we have a revised condition number 21 that Mr. Collier wrote in the event that the commission were wanting to address that. It's ready to go for you as an alternative condition.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. Commissioner Hirsch.
Thank you, Chair Sablon. And actually, if you could leave that slide up just a little bit longer, Mr. Hardy. I was just reading it and wanted to thank Commissioner Steger for asking that question, because I had a similar confusion about the applicant's counter proposal and how exactly that would work out in terms of the poles on the existing land. No, I really do understand the applicant's concerns with the cost of full undergrounding, and I appreciate that the applicants tried to work in good faith to find a compromise option. But I do feel pretty strongly on this issue. I think that undergrounding is really, really important for the, not only the resiliency of our city's energy structure, but just the safety of residents. It was just 2 months ago, we had that massive windstorm in the city where vast neighborhoods in West Sacramento were out of power for days, and they were mostly affected because they did not have undergrounding of lines. So in this case, I really think that the best option for the community as a whole is to not set a precedent now, to take a step back from the city's general plan when it comes to undergrounding. And I would fully support the existing project condition number 21, not the revised one up right now, but the existing condition 21 in the staff report to require full undergrounding. I actually had a question about project condition number 22, however, and I noticed that was for a 20-foot wide easement on the eastern edge of the project. And I was wondering if staff could explain that project condition a little bit more.
That was a condition of the Parks Department, because they want to have a continuous trail in the Parks Master Plan running down the main drain, which would cross over to this property. It was a condition that was formerly on the project, as this has been historically many years ago, I think 2009, original tentative map, and then it went to a subdivision map, and now it's back to a tentative parcel map. This condition is consistent way back then as now. I did run that condition by the Parks Director. That is exactly her condition and worded exactly what she needs to have a continuous path to allow for the easement to be in place so in the future it can all connect.
Thank you. I think that's fantastic. Like Chair Sablan, I served on the city's Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure Commission for several years. And so making sure that developments include recreational access and recreational amenities like bike trails is really important to me. So I'm glad as I was reading the staff report and looking at condition number 21, when I saw condition number 22 below it, I thought that was equally important. So I wanted to add my comments to that. And at that's all my comments, Chair Sablan.
Thank you, Commissioner Hirsch. And Vice Chair Bernliner, did you have questions for staff?
No, I just wanted to echo Commissioner Hirsch's sentiments on the condition number 21, and I strongly feel that the applicant should be paying for the undergrounding of those utilities. With that, will there be upgrades? This is, I guess, for the applicant. Will there be upgrades to the transformers or any kind of utility upgrades as you're undergrounding the lines?
I think, is that a staff question or an applicant question? I don't know if staff, Mr. Hardy, can you take that, or is that going to the applicant?
I think that would be for staff wise, Mark would need to jump in on if there was any requirements to address that.
I honestly don't know. I'm not familiar with the system out there, or if there's any upgrades necessary to serve this project, but that's the only upgrades that we would be looking at would be what would be necessary to serve these 4 parcels.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was going to happen. Thank you. Those are all my comments and questions.
I did want to clarify something about this. We've discussed about if the city had an obligation to underground. Really, what doesn't mean that the city would go out and do that tomorrow, next week, or even 10 years from now. So what that really means is that if future undergrounding were to be necessary, it likely would become the city's responsibility to fund that, somehow. But it doesn't mean that the city would need to go out and just do it right away based on however you guys make a decision, this evening. So I don't want it to feel like you're choosing between the applicant and the city in this particular context, because they're not that directly linked. If you were to approve the alternative, for example, you're not compelling the city in any way to go out and do any undergrounding project out there or spend the funds that would be necessary to do that. We always struggle with undergrounding because we all want it done, but we also recognize it's costly. And when you're looking at the poles, and so it's all part of a system. They're all interconnected. So when we look at a relatively small site, somewhat in a vacuum, you can see this sort of there can be a lot of unintended consequences, as Mark was describing. You could take down a couple of poles, but then you sometimes end up adding a new one. So what is your net gain of undergrounding for the cost, especially? Because I think Mark made a good point about it. If you underground, unless you're going to underground everything all at once, the underground still has to come back above ground, at some point. So we've seen this a lot, particularly like in the Washington neighborhood, where we wanted someone to take down a pole on their small parcel and end up winding up with a net gain of poles, which is sort of counterintuitive. So if there's anything that needs to be done on a more holistic, kind of basis, it's utility undergrounding, so that you don't end up undergrounding the poles on one site and then putting up new poles on the two properties on either side. So I want the commission to sort of look at the undergrounding here, more broadly than just, what the mere frontage of this property, and think about what could be the end result along that entire stretch of Marshall in terms of, how what's the net, want to make sure we have a net gain of poles, or excuse me, a net loss of poles, and make sure that that's worth it.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Tilley. I see a couple hands up. Now, are these questions for staff or these comments?
Mine is a question. I just don't know if it's directed to the applicant or to staff.
And mine is a question for staff, Chair.
Okay. Let's see. Commissioner Hirsch, do you want to go first? And then Commissioner Esquivel, we could take your question, and if it's for the applicant, we can open up the public hearing and hear from the applicant. So, okay, Commissioner Hirsch.
Thank you, Chair Sablon. And it just came to me through Mr. Tilley's good reminder of what we're considering here today, because I do understand the applicant's concerns about the cost that's involved with undergrounding. And so I was hoping Mr. Hardy could go into maybe a little more detail. And he'd mentioned in his presentation now, it's in the staff report, the three financing tools that were considered: the BOLD, the SCIP, and the Mello-Roos. Mr. Hardy explained that the costs of this particular undergrounding weren't high enough to meet the minimums for those programs. But based off what Mr. Tilley said, where we really should have a more comprehensive look at this, we're not just talking about 5 poles, but it's really a broader issue. Mr. Hardy, is there any way that the city could work with the applicant, but also surrounding properties, to use those financing mechanisms to help support additional undergrounding?
The only exploration that we did with that was regards to the CFD in the local area, because you can join into an annex into with the director. As far as the other programs, we have, I believe, used the SCIP program for other reasons in the city. This holistic undergrounding resiliency, we don't have a plan in place or a system in place beyond the policy objective in the general plan. So it would sort of need a little more genesis and attention and direction of how we accomplish that. And maybe these are tools that could be utilized to do that. But that discussion was much larger, which we did not have.
In the overall scheme of things, I mean, this is a pretty small project. It's, 4 lots, in the end, although be it big lots, but it's still 4 lots. And so there's just not a lot of economy of scale, for something like this. SCIP is, typically done with much larger developments. What we have here is really a small project in the overall, scheme of things on, 10 acres. So I think we probably should allow the applicant to put her input on this as well. She's been working closely with us on this for a long time and previous projects as well. So I encourage the commission to hear the applicant's input also.
Thank you, Mr. Tilley. And then Commissioner Esquivel.
Yeah, and looking at whether it's either the 2 poles or the 5 poles that would go underground, is there any difference or is there any impact on the existing surrounding residents? Or what impact, if any, would there be?
It's still connecting the power grid, whether it's above ground or below ground. So there wouldn't be any net change to the existing power structure, other than if somebody were to hit the pole above ground that's currently there, you would alleviate that issue. But once it's all connected appropriately underground, it wouldn't be any change from today's power, other than wind or a car accident on the existing poles that are being undergrounded.
Yeah, but nobody's going to be like cut off or anything, you know, like that. There could be obviously temporary disruption during construction, but no one's going to be cut off. We just want to be mindful of, you know, what might happen beyond the borders of this property if the poles are undergrounded here. What will be sort of the ripple effect of that?
Thank you, and I appreciate that. I do think that having them underground provides a safety mechanism for Marshall. Just as a resident that lives off of Marshall, there are accidents that take place, and unfortunately, when people do speed, they do end up hitting poles, and that does cause an effect on the powerage for a lot of these residents out here. So appreciate your comments and being able to answer that question. At least I know we wouldn't be impacted in terms of our energy in whichever way the project would take place.
Commissioner Lockhart, did you have a question for staff?
I do have a question for staff. Mr. Tilley, when you were talking about asking the commission to consider this more broadly, I just would appreciate clarification that if the commission takes the staff's recommendation to have the applicant remove all 5 poles, is there connectivity? So would everything be underground at that point? Would there be no additional poles? How I just was wondering if you could clarify that for me.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you know, Mark Collier to jump in here too. But as I recall from his earlier statement, we likely would end up with another pole on the west side of Otis, because it's overhead all the way along Marshall there. So if we underground here, it still has to somehow connect back to above ground poles beyond the project boundary. So you know, we could still wind up with a net loss of poles, but is that, you know, is going from 5 to 4, is that worth it? You know, is that worth it? So Mark, could you elaborate a little bit on what would happen if the poles on this property were all undergrounded?
Yes, you're gonna have a new pole on the west side of Otis Avenue, and you're gonna have a new pole at her eastern boundary.
So we're talking of a net loss of 3?
A net loss of 4.
Of 4. Okay, thank you.
No, I'm sorry, 3. You're right.
Okay, thanks.
You're right.
And then Commissioner Steger, did you have a question for staff?
I do, real quick. And this is follow-up to Mr. Collier. So when you say on the west side of Otis, is that on Marshall or is that on Otis?
It's on Marshall. It's on
Marshall. Okay.
So if we're looking to remove the pole, which is pretty much at the intersection of Otis and Marshall, but it's on her property, if we're saying we want all poles removed from her property, even though it's pretty much at her boundary, well, the next logical place to put it is immediately across the street on Otis. So it's immediately across the street on the west side.
Could we benefit from, and one of the, I think it's been mentioned previous with regards to individuals leaving the roadway and striking these poles and knocking out power to the Linden Loop for several, you know, I live in the area long enough to have experienced that or seen that experienced. And so in that scenario, do we have the benefit of at least setting that new pole back enough to benefit from, again, the potential for a vehicle leaving the roadway and striking that pole and knocking down power to the surrounding areas?
Well, I'm not a utility pole designer, but I know, especially where you have issues with, you know, the alignment of the poles. It has to stay within the right of way or easement. You know, you can't just go plop it on the neighbor's property.
Sure.
So possibly we could set it back a little bit. You know, those lines are under a lot of tension, so they have to be mindful of the angle of the line as they set them. So maybe a little bit, enough to make a difference if someone leaves the edge of pavement. I can't say for sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair Sablon.
Thank you. And Commissioner Hirsch, I see your hands up. Did you have a question for staff?
I do, and I apologize, Chair Sablon. I hope this is my final question. You know, I know we've been circling, but because I'm not as familiar with this neighborhood as some of my fellow commissioners, could we have the staff pull back up that diagram that was not in our staff packet, so I'm not as familiar with it? The diagram that shows the applicant's property with the option of the 2 versus the 5, just so I can get a better understanding.
Can you pull that up, Ben?
Because particularly from Commissioner Lockhart's question, now I'm more confused than I was in the beginning. If the applicant's counteroffer is to underground 2 and leave 3, and the city's option of undergrounding all 5 just to put 2 back up would also result in 3. Could you explain a little bit more what the difference on this map, where they're located, and what the total number of the poles would be at the end of the project? You know, you were mentioning that the staff's recommendation of 5 underground is taken in place. We'd have to put 1 up on the western side of Otis. Could you show, is that where the cursor is on the map?
Yeah.
And 1 on the eastern side of the applicant's property?
Right there.
So it's either to have 2 on sort of the extreme edges of this diagram, or to have the 3 remaining with the large green line.
Correct.
Is that what we're discussing?
Correct.
Well, I mean, with that's helpful. Thank you. That is very helpful. But now I think personally, I am more conflicted now than I was in the beginning between the applicant's counter and the staff recommendation of full undergrounding. So, you know, I'll be thinking about it as we go about the public hearing and hear from the applicant. But that was my staff question. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That did help clarify a bit more too. Okay, so with that, we'll open up the public hearing. Does the applicant have a prepared presentation, or is it for questions?
Presentation, please.
And I don't want to mispronounce your name. Can you say your last name for us?
Hi, my name is Donna Weinberg. I'm the owner of the Marshall property in discussion. I apologize. I don't know why my camera's not working. But good evening, members of the West Sacramento Planning Commission and staff. It's great to see so many new faces this evening. I look forward to seeing positive changes and growth in our community in the upcoming years. I think there's one thing that some people may not know, but Marshall Road is really an interesting strip in our city. All the way from Jefferson to the canal, there's not a single post that's been undergrounded. As you've heard, my 10 acres is a tiny, tiny thing in the picture, in the grand scheme of things. The neighbor across from me on Marshall and Otis is a 60-acre parcel that's been for sale for well over a year or 2 now. The other side of me of the canal, I believe, is also a 10-acre like mine. He's had it on and off the market for well over 10 years. Previously, some of you may know that I had it as a 8 parcel map, an 8 1-acre parcel map. And it was just not financially feasible to move forward because of the undergrounding and then bringing in the roadway and the sewer and all the stuff that's associated with creating that kind of subdivision. When I brought that up to Mark Collier in the past, he had told me that the original map that I had that was 4 2.5-acre lots, the commissioners did completely waive the undergrounding because it is such a small map and such a small, in the larger scheme of things, as we had said. I understand that it doesn't want to be waived. I understand that. I want to build my own house there. I don't necessarily want the posts there either. But it makes sense to me. I'm not sure if, you know, when you guys look at those 2 posts, they're less than 5 feet apart. I had planned on replacing one of those with 1 only. So it's really taking down 3 posts, leaving 2 posts on my property to not go across to other people's properties and to disturb Otis the canal and everything else. So that's, I think it's fair and reasonable to request that, since no posts will actually change. 3 will come down, 2 are left. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Weinberg. Do any of the commissioners have any questions of the applicant at this time? See Commissioner Hirsch.
Thank you, Chair Sablan, and thank you, Ms. Weinberg, for your presentation. Again, what might be helpful for me, if staff could pull back up that map so I can get a proper understanding. Because Ms. Weinberg, from what I've heard you say just now, in your counter proposal, you were already considering taking down 2 of the poles that are very close to one another and replacing it with just 1 pole. Is that correct? And if so, could you tell me which one on the map you were planning on doing that with?
So the 2 posts are literally less than 5 feet apart, not even, maybe 3 feet. There's no reason, I don't know what's the reasoning that there were 2 there. I think it has to do with there used to be a house on the property that I long ago tore down. So it just stayed there. So I don't know which one it would be. My guess is the one further away from my property towards the canal.
Okay, and so then, just so I have a proper understanding of the numbers, if that were taking place, if we go about today as a commission to do the revised condition 21, the 2 of the 5 poles in the middle would still be removed, and the 2 poles very close to one another on the right would become a single pole, meaning there would just be 2 of the 5 poles remaining?
Correct. Yes. So if I had to remove all 5, I would basically have to put a pole, as Mark Collier had mentioned, on the other side of Otis, crossing the street to my neighbor's side. And if exactly where he's pointing to right now, if I were to have to remove the other 2 that are there, I would have to literally 15 feet down from there, not even 10 feet, put another new post anyway. So my request is to remove 3 of the 5 and leave the existing 2, because they would have to be put up anyway, about 15 feet in each direction.
Thank you, Ms. Weinberg. My next question to city staff then would be, with that proposal by the applicant, would there need to be the construction of any additional poles?
Can you feel that, Mark?
I don't believe there would. The only tricky part, and again, I'm not a utility pole designer, is the 1 pole that on the east side that she's talking about removing does have a transformer on it. So if there's a need to retain that transformer, and for some reason it can't go on the other pole, there might be some accommodation that needs to be made. That pole might not be able to be removed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both. I have some thoughts, but I think it's more appropriate for after the public hearing is closed and we go back to commission deliberation. So if that's the case, that's all I have for right now, Chair Sablan.
Thank you, Commissioner Hirsch. Do any of the other commissioners have questions? I'm not seeing any hands. Mr. Mirzak, do we have any public comments for this item?
We do not have any public comment, but we do have 2 cell phone callers. I don't know if they're for this item or not.
Let's see. For the callers on 9, I believe it's *9 if you want to raise your hand for this item. I'm not seeing their hand go up.
I'm not either.
Okay. I think with that, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. I don't know if staff has any comments to add based on what the applicant said, if you wanted to respond to any of that, and then we'll open it up to the commission.
Well, I think you can see why the prior commission struggled on this one a little bit too. Part of the challenge here also is this is the edge of the rural, one of the rural core and then you have the, single family subdivision to the north. So it's right at that interface, and it's a fairly abrupt, transition. The staff is sensitive to what the applicant is saying. If we were in another more rural part of town, like off of Antioch or something like that, and we're doing a small map, the commission in the past had, fairly often waived those requirements. Here, the context is a little different. We're right across from Bridgeway Island and some of the other neighborhoods in that area. But I'd encourage the commission just to try to think about, the net gain of any undergrounding, and, is that justified? Because even a net loss of one pole could still be very expensive. Staff is following what's in the general plan and the municipal code on this, but given that the municipal code also provides the planning commission with the authority to waive that requirement, we wanted to provide these options for you, and note that should the commission wish to go with the applicant's counter proposal on that, staff would not object to that in any manner.
Thank you, Mr. Tilley. So with that, we'll open up to deliberation for the commissioners. Commissioner Steger.
Yes, sorry. Final question, and probably mostly because of my inexperience, but in terms of what the applicant had just suggested in that she removed the 2 poles and then consolidate the other 2 into a single pole, is that something as the commission can consider in deliberation, or is that?
The commission would have that discretion.
Got it. Thank you.
Commissioner Hirsch.
Thanks, Chair Sablon. I would just ask if staff could pull the map up again as we go about our deliberation. I find that map really helpful. And, I think sensing what Commissioner Steger was asking, I sort of am leaning towards a similar thought now. My first instinct on this, and one that I still believe is very important, full undergrounding is the ideal. Just in terms of the resiliency of our power lines, the safety of our residents. And in this case, thinking of the future residents who would be living on the 4 lots that this parcel would be split into, they would benefit from having underground lines. But if what we're really talking about now is just deciding there are 5 currently, and under either option, we're still going to have 2 or 3, and that depending on whether the applicant can combine the 2 on the far right into a single one. I'm a little more split now, just personally, from my thoughts. And I know I've done a lot of talking, so I would love to do a lot of listening, but right now I'm sort of leaning towards if the commission would want to do a revised condition number 21, not solely based off of what the applicant has proposed, but to also then require the applicant to combine the 2 on the far right into a single pole. And I'm not making a motion, I'm just throwing it out there. That's sort of where I'm leaning from everything that I've heard so far. So thank you, Chair Sablon.
Thank you, Commissioner Hirsch. Commissioner Lockhart.
Thank you, Chair Sablon. And just to echo Commissioner Hirsch, originally, before coming into this meeting, I felt pretty strongly about following staff's recommendation for the complete undergrounding. Just as been stated by other commissioners, I feel strongly about the safety, the resiliency, and all the benefits of undergrounding. But if we're able to move this forward and we're able to at least achieve similar goals and a net loss of poles, I was particularly compelled by the applicant who said that there have been no other improvements along this roadway. So it would at least make progress towards the city's goals. I think it would be reasonable to accommodate the applicant's request again, as long as we can do our very best to keep it at a net loss of 3 poles.
Thank you, Commissioner Lockhart. Do we have any other commissioners? Okay. Well, So I think I was in the same position with both Commissioners Lockhart and Hirsch of, I live in the state streets. We have, our poles are above ground and we didn't have power for 3 days a few months ago. So that recent event really had me in we need to underground all of this. But looking at this image that staff pulled up for us, I think we end up with essentially the same amount of undergrounding, and if we get rid of all the poles, or if we, do the applicant's proposed alternative. So, yeah. So I think I just echo what these commissioners have already said, and we have Commissioner Steer.
Yes, sorry, I'd like to echo what everyone has said in that I do feel good about the proposal of removing the two that are in the middle of the property along Marshall, and then as well, consolidating the two on the east side of the property into a single one. And I think if that's that would be an approach I would be interested in, having now received all the information. So this has been really helpful. Thank you.
If the commission were leaning that way, I would suggest adding a where feasible clause regarding the combining the two poles on the eastern corner, based on what Mark said about the transformer there.
Yeah, with that, can we move the slide to the revised condition 21, so we just look at what would need to be changed there? So, Mr. Tilley, we would have to add a part about that third pole in here and say if feasible.
Yeah, I would like to include a where feasible. If it proves with the transformer that's not possible, I would not want the applicant to have to come back to further modify the condition in front of the Planning Commission. Again, if the commission were comfortable with that. But I think that transformer over there is pretty important. I know whenever, seems like if there's a car hits it or something over there, half of Southport goes out. Power even, miles away. So we would need to work in a where feasible language related to the two poles at the, looks like northeast corner of the property.
And is that something we could direct staff to work on with city council or city attorney?
Yes.
Okay.
You could provide us that direction, and we can finalize the language with the applicant and the city attorney right away, if that's the way the commission decides to vote.
Okay.
We would just need clear direction as part of the motion.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Commissioner Hirsch.
Thanks, Chair Sablan. And my final two questions, just because I'm a new planning commissioner, so I'm trying to get a proper educational understanding. Mr. Tilley, if the commission votes tonight to not require the full undergrounding of all the utility poles in the property, in the future, would the city, if it's doing something more comprehensive among all the surrounding properties with overhead power lines, still be able to underground those, require undergrounding in some way, or how would that work? Because again, my preference would be to underground not just this property, but all of the properties. And I want to make sure that the decision we're making today for this particular property wouldn't be an obstacle to that in the future.
I don't see how this would preclude a larger undergrounding effort out there, should that ever occur. I think if anything now we're at least starting our way to get there by, removing, sounds like 2, potentially 3 poles. That's a start. But in a most ideal world, utility undergrounding, would be done on a much longer stretch, so that you don't end up taking down, 3 poles and putting 2 back up. That's when we can't do it, from 2 logical bookends. This does come up, and if it's worth it to take down 3 poles and add 2 more up with net loss of 1, something like that, sometimes it's not worth it. Here it seems like we have an opportunity to do at least some undergrounding across the majority of the frontage of the property along Marshall, and that would seem to be a gain. Even if it's not 100% gain, it's still a gain.
Thank you. My final question then, based off of the suggested wording you have, if the commission does a additional provision to this revised condition about if viable, is there a way that the applicant and the city could find out before we make our decision if it's viable to combine those two poles and then come back to us? Just because I would feel much more comfortable making this decision today, knowing whether or not that's actually viable, and what the final numbers of the poles on the property will be.
I imagine that would have that decision or that information would have to be come up with in conjunction with PG&E. And I can't speak to how quickly we could get such an answer from PG&E. I don't know, Mark, if you have any more insights on that, but I don't think it would be a decision that could be decided unilaterally without PG&E's involvement.
No, we would definitely need PG&E's input.
And would that timeline be? It's not as simple as coming back in 2 weeks and letting us know. It's.
I would not bet on that at all. PG&E, very big company, very busy. And if we start getting into wildfire season again, PG&E's attentions, could be elsewhere, and rightfully so. So if we could do that, but I would like to just be honest that that could mean a considerable delay for the applicant.
Understood. Thank you. That's all I have right now, Chair Sablan.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Hirsch. Commissioner Lockhart, I'm not sure if your hand was still up from before or.
No, my questions have been answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Commissioner Esquivel?
Yeah, mine was just more in the comments of where I was leaning, and I think any movement in the right direction, even if it's trying to get two underground, I think is good progress. And even if and just looking at the staff report too, that this action would advance the goals and the policies for this project site. So appreciate the applicant's opportunity to speak on their perspective. And I do agree that I think if we could have an opportunity to have all of them underground in the future, that would be of preference. But even if we just have two, I think that would move us in the right direction.
Thank you. Yeah, so it sounds like the commissioners are leaning towards accepting the revised condition 21 as proposed by the applicant. So I think if there isn't further deliberation, we can entertain a motion.
Well, real quick, Chair Sablan, I just want to make clear, I would be supportive of the revised condition with the additional provision that the two poles on the eastern edge be combined if viable.
Staff could work with that if that's just that direction. Would just your motion would include the overall staff recommendation with the revised condition 21, and then further direct staff to include the where feasible language related to the two poles that are right next to each other.
May I second that motion? Is that?
Okay, well,
I don't think we had a. Did
Sorry.
you make a motion?
I'll go ahead and make a motion.
I was providing a suggested motion. For
I'll move that the commission, one, find that the intent of the parcel map is exempt from CEQA for the reasons stated in the staff analysis, and two, approve the requested tentative parcel map subject to all the conditions in the staff report, except for revising condition 21 as we've discussed. So based off of the applicant's proposed alternative with an additional provision stating that the two poles on the eastern edge be combined into a single pole if feasible. And I think that sums it up.
I agree, and I second.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. All right. Mr. Mearsbeck, can you do the roll call, please?
Commissioner Steger?
Aye.
Commissioner Berliner?
No.
Commissioner Middleman?
Aye.
Commissioner Esquivel?
Aye.
Commissioner Hirsch?
Aye.
Commissioner Lockhart?
Aye.
Chair Sablon?
Aye. Okay. Motion passes. And with that, best of luck to you, Mrs. Weinberg, or Ms. Weinberg. Thank you for showing up and speaking your piece today.
Thank you.
Okay. And with that, we will move to item 5 on the agenda. For estates, Ms. Allen?
Really quickly, I need to recuse myself from this item because I live too close to the development.
Okay. Thank you. And then so Mr. Tilley, so Vice Chair Berliner will need to sign off from the meeting at this point.
This is our last item of business tonight, so she may exit the meeting. Otherwise, I would recommend at least muting herself and turning off her camera for this item. Had we been meeting in person in the chambers, any commissioner with a conflict would announce their conflict, as Vice Chair Berliner said, and then they would actually leave the dais and leave the room. So we would want to try to do something equivalent here in our virtual format, but also Commissioner Berliner could also just exit the whole meeting at this point if she wishes to do so, because this will be our last item of business other than informal discussion.
I'm going to leave the meeting. Have a good weekend, everyone. Okay.
So with that, we'll turn it over to Ms. Allen, the staff presentation on this.
Thank you. This project is a vesting tentative subdivision map application for the creation of 59 residential lots, 2 lots for a bike trail connection, and 1 remainder lot. The project is located east of Village Parkway and north of Lake Washington Boulevard, and is located directly east of the Newport 12 subdivision, which has yet to be constructed but has been approved. And it's located north of the River Oaks subdivision, which, like Newport 12, has been approved but is not yet constructed. The project is located in the residential 1-family zone, so it's R1B, and the residential densities in this zone range from 1.1 to 6 units per acre. The project includes 5 different house plans, 1 single-story plan, and 4 2-story plans. The homes are proposed to range from just over 2,100 square feet to a little over 3,100 square feet. This project is part of the overall Newport Estates development. That development as a whole was approved by the Planning Commission back in 1998. And since that time, 8 phases of the development have been completed, and another 4 are entitled. And this phase represents phase 13 of Newport Estates. As you noticed in your memo, we are proposing changes to 3 of the conditions of approval as enumerated. And we are recommending approval of the project as all the findings for the project can be made. The applicant is in attendance and can answer any questions should you have them of him. We also have a representative from Development Engineering here who can answer some of your more technical questions. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have at this time.
Thank you, Mrs. Allen. And do the commissioners have any questions of staff at this time? Commissioner Hirsch.
Thanks, Chair Sablon. And just wanting to make sure public comments happen after this initial report. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Only reason I ask is because after reviewing the public comments, they share and echo some of the thoughts that I have about this. But for right now, for staff questions, if you could explain on page 69 of the agenda packet tonight, it talks about this property would be divided into, dozens of single family lots plus 2 lots for a bike trail connection plus 1 remainder lot. If you could elaborate about what the bike trail connection lots are and what the remainder lot is.
The bike trail connection lots are located on the far southern edge of the property and would connect up to the levee up above for people to access for recreation. The 1 remainder lot is on the far northern side of the property and is located between 2 residential lots, essentially where a stub out for a road might go.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. My next question, reading on page 76 of the staff report, that this property has a general plan designation of low density residential and a zoning designation of residential 1 family. To clarify, does that mean that homes are the only acceptable use for property with that zoning designation, or would parks and green space also be an acceptable use?
Parks are a permitted use in all residential zones, so yes, they would be allowed.
Okay. And the final staff question I have at this time, on page 90, in the project specific condition number 90, where it says the developer shall construct a 12-foot multi-use trail along the southern edge of the subdivision. 1, will this trail connect with any existing trails or connect with the trail on top of the levee? And then 2, if you could explain why the southern edge was selected as opposed to the northern or the eastern edge.
I'm going to defer that question to Mr. Ramirez from our Development Engineering Department, as that was his condition. Candido, can you answer that?
Yes, that the southern alignment is consistent with the bike trails and master plan.
And Mr. Ramirez, would that dead end then at the levee, or would it connect with the existing trail on top of the levee?
The trail that actually would lead to the O&M corridor that's at the base of the levee. The ways up onto top of the levee would actually be further south as you approach the marinas, where you can still get vehicular access up to where the marinas are. So we anticipate, folks will be at the base, maybe at the base of the levee here, but then they can get on to the O&M corridor and then be able to access a future trail on top of the levee, but only at that designated location where there is actually access already provided to the top of the levee.
Thank you, Mr. Telly. And I guess now my actual final question, since that's prompted me to ask, one thing that gave me concern, it was difficult to tell from the attachments in the staff report on the PDF. Is there an O&M corridor then between Newport Estates 13 and the levee? From my look, it sort of looked like the homes were abutting directly against the levee. So I wasn't sure.
Well, they actually butt up to the O&M corridor itself. So there is an O&M corridor at the base of the levee. And then the levee slopes up, from there. So they're not adjacent to the levee itself immediately. There is the O&M corridor at the bottom.
That's really helpful to know. Thank you, Mr. Tilley. That's all my questions, Chair Sablan.
I don't see any other hands up from the commissioners. So I'm going to open up the public hearing. Does the applicant have a presentation?
Mr. Sestero, were you going to be speaking on behalf of the project? I do see a hand up with a 925 number, which would be the area code, I believe, where the applicant's company is based from, but I think they're muted still.
Mr. Mearswick, do you know what they have to push? Is it *6 to unmute?
I do not know that number.
How's that?
There you go.
There, we can hear you.
Okay. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
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 All right. This is Dick Sestero. I'm with Seacon, the developer of Newport Estates. And I think the staff report explains this project fairly well. We have been developing Newport for the last over 20 years, and this is really the last phase of the project. We're just now building homes in the Newport Villas, which you may have seen, which is at the far other end by the close to the detention basin. Anyway, over the years, we put in all the infrastructure out there, the sewer, the water, the drainage infrastructure. And so this project, everything is planned to accommodate it. And all the utilities are really out right adjacent to it. Unit 12 is next to it. And Unit 12, we're planning to start grading that very shortly, as soon as we can get the grading permit issued, but we're ready to go on Unit 12, and then Unit 13 would follow that. We concur with the conditions of approval. And one thing I might mention too is that trail connection. The trail master plan, as I understand it now, brings a trail along Lake Washington, crosses over Village Parkway right at this location, and then would continue to the levee. And the idea is that it would eventually connect to the levee trail. Once it gets beyond our property, I'm not sure how that works, but I mean, that was what the master plan I know shows. Also, there was a question about where we are next to the levee. And when the levee was done, the setback levee, they installed an iron fence along the boundary. And so we come next to that, but we don't get onto the levee or onto the O&M part of the levee. We're short of the levee property. Other than that, I'm prepared to answer any questions that any of the commissioners have. Anyway, we look forward to your approval of this project. It's been in the works, in the plans for a long time, so we'd appreciate that. Again, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Great, thank you. And it was Mr. Cisneros or Sesteros?
Sestero.
Sestero. Do any of the commissioners have any questions of the applicant? Commissioner Hirsch.
Thanks, Chair Sablan. And thank you, Mr. Sestero, for that presentation. It really is helpful. And from reading the staff report, I understand that full build out of this project, it has taken over 2 decades. For a lot's happened in the last 2 decades, understandable reasons. So, congratulations on reaching close to the end. I believe Unit 13 is the last unit of the total project. My question is just to get a better understanding again of the O&M, and if staff maybe could pull up the attachment. I think it was attachment 2 that goes over the map so I can get a clearer view again, because it was a little hard to see from the staff report. Can you explain how large the O&M the city has between where your Newport Estates Unit 13 ends and where the setback levy begins is? Because I did have some concerns. My thought coming into tonight's meeting was that the fences of the backyards were honestly directly up against the levee and just, packed so tightly in. And this is the attachment I couldn't quite tell that from. So if you could maybe explain.
Yes, on the levee plan there's what they call the setback levee, and there's quite an area, I think it's like over 70 feet. It's the lighter color part right next to our lots. That's basically just an open area. And partway up it, there's a road that they call an O&M trail. But we don't touch that at all. Like I said, there's an iron fence that goes along our boundary. And we have lots that are primarily side on to the levee, so they're not really backing up to it. Maybe one or two are, but again, it's there's a wide open area that slope gently down toward our property from the top of the levee.
Thank you. That is helpful to know. And Mr. Tilley, if you could just confirm, since it was hard for me to tell from this diagram, but the accuracy of that. So there's a 70-foot O&M between where the applicant's property ends and where the setback levee begins to slope up. Is that correct?
I don't know if it's exact that dimension, but this is, the levee in this area, the new levee is substantial. If you could look toward the bottom center of that exhibit, you can see where it's labeled South River Road. That is where the levee, essentially used to be. So Masafka did acquire land from this developer to ultimately construct these improvements. So there is a significant landside slope and O&M corridor at the landside base of the levee that's here. And what they're attempting to do is build in lots with the remaining land that's there. And you can see how these overall land areas are, I should say, somewhat irregularly shaped. And a lot of that is a result of what Wasafka had to acquire in order to construct this levee. So setbacks from the levee itself, including the O&M corridor, have been accounted for in this project.
Great, thank you. Those are all the questions I have at this time.
Not seeing any other hands up at this time. Mr. Mierzwick, do we have any public comments on this item?
We had 3 public comments on this item. You guys were provided those public comments and they're available online.
Thank you. And do we have any public comments in the Zoom meeting now?
I do not believe so.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And with that, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for deliberation. Commissioner Hirsch.
Thanks, Chair Sablan. Like I mentioned at the beginning, the public comments, which we all received but haven't been read, 2 of the 3 talk about a desire to either have a connection to the recreation trail on top of the levee or a desire to have park space, baseball fields, soccer fields, etc., on this property. And those echo some of the concerns I had coming into this, because coming in, based off of what I could tell from the diagram, I thought this was, a sea of houses all the way up against the very base of the levee. So I certainly do appreciate the clarification I've received tonight from the applicant and from city staff that is not the case, and that there is quite a wide open space still between where Newport Estates Unit 13 ends and where the setback levee begins. But I do have some concerns that grew on me as I was reading through the staff packet when it comes to the amount of park space and the amount of green space in this area. based off of the diagram once again, and if staff maybe could pull that up of Newport Estates Unit 13, I understand that what is currently an open field is already set to be developed by Newport Estates Unit 12, which is in the light gray at the top of that diagram. So what we're really talking about here is relatively small segments of open space that will now be blocked off by Newport Estate Unit 12. But I still have a little bit of hesitancy looking at this diagram and seeing that it looks like we are packing homes as tightly in as possible around the curves of the setback levee as we can. And between the irregular shape and the understanding that this is a lot of homes without a lot of open space, I personally sympathize with the public comments that we received. Those were thoughts that I shared before we even received the public comments. And when I was reading through the staff report, for example, on page 138, which is attachment number 7, the city's analysis of whether Newport Estates Unit 13 is within the scope of the General Plan 2035 EIR. It talks about the city's 2003 Parks Master Plan, which sets a standard of 5 acres of parks per 1,000 residents. And then further goes on to say, with the projected population in 2035 of over 81,000 residents, over 400 acres of parks are required in the city to meet the standard, which is 254.8 acres more than currently exist. So there's clearly a discrepancy between the amount of park space and green space and what can still be preserved. And I don't know if this is outside the scope of the Planning Commission's deliberation authority. Maybe Mr. Tilley can help, but for what we're deciding today, whether to approve the tentative parcel map of Newport Estates Unit 13, is it a simple, yes or no based off what's been proposed, as we can see on the screen in front of us, or could we add conditions, that we would like to see some green space, some park space preserved? And I understand it's small, even a mini park, but just because, I think that's really important. And to be clear, I'm not anti-housing. I'm not in my backyard person. I would much rather, see, instead of single family homes, maybe a mixture of that and medium density, if it means that there's some open space and some green space left, instead of just a full build out of asphalt and cul-de-sacs right next to the levee. So I guess that's my deliberation, my thoughts, and my question to Mr. Tilley of whether that's even something that we can discuss as a commission.
One thing I did want to point out about this, Commissioner Hurst, is this project is in relatively close proximity to the park in the Oak Grove, which is at the corner of Lake Washington and Village Parkway, that has the ropes course in it now. That park's approximately 8.5 acres in size, so it is a decent sized park, and it's certainly within easy walking distance for the residents of Newport 13 to access, as long as them also being able to access the O&M corridor, along with eventually being able to get up onto the levee. So there are recreational activities available within close proximity of this project.
Thank you, Ms. Allen, for that clarification. And I think it's really important. I live about within a mile of what's being discussed, so I've got a pretty good understanding. And I think that the Treetop Sack Park you're describing is a fantastic community asset. But at the same time, it's not quite a traditional park. Half of it is a pay to access, climbing the trees, and there's a playground and a parking lot and some other amenities, but it's not a soccer field or a baseball field or just open grass. So I think there is some distinction there. And I also think, even with that being in close proximity, from my understanding, and maybe staff could explain if it's otherwise, there's still a pretty big discrepancy between the park space in the city now and the 250 acres of park space that the city is supposed to have based off of population projections. But again, Mr. Tilley, I don't know if this is outside the scope of what we can even discuss. So before I get too far down, I just want to make sure.
I mean, I still think you're within the outer boundaries of what's could be before you here. In terms of parks and park sites, especially ones that would be formally improved with a soccer field or baseball field, something like that. All of that is outlined in the Parks Master Plan. This is not a site that is in there that's contemplated for any type of park development or acquisition of that land, by the city for those kinds of improvements. So, but partially how those types of parks and other things are improved is by how developments like this, especially a smaller one like this, where it might not be practical to build in a full-blown, park into it. That's where the park impact fees come along, and those are the funds by which the city would use to acquire parkland elsewhere and then develop those parks. So this is all, this is one piece of the overall puzzle in Southport and as a city as a whole. And one of the things we mentioned parks, a lot of, we've definitely expanded, I think, our view of what a park is. In the old days, it would be if it didn't have a baseball diamond on it, it wasn't a park. And now we have several parks in town that are more passive, if you will, such as the Heritage Oaks Park. Whitey Boscare Park is maybe a half-mile west of here. Delta Gardens Park is maybe a half-mile north of this particular site. So we don't make up parks on a sort of ad hoc, basis. Had there been a park site in the Parks Master Plan for this area, this project would have had to accommodate it, and it would have been reflected on the maps that you have before you tonight. So, smaller ticket items, trails, things like that are well within the Planning Commission's consideration and part of what staff looks at with this, especially within the Southport Design Guidelines. In this particular project, however, this is not identified as a park site other than the trail connection at the southern end, which is important because that would ultimately connect to the cycle track along Lake Washington, heading west from here, and then it also would lead sort of dead end at the O&M corridor, and which would be the main trail connection throughout all of Southport. So there's a lot going on just immediately outside the boundaries of this project, but really the question before you tonight is not if to develop this site, but how. And so this is what the developer has proposed. In our staff's view, it is consistent with our applicable standards and general plan policies.
Well, thank you, Mr. Tilley. That's really helpful and food for thought. And those are all the questions I have at this time.
Thank you. And I did see our city attorney pop up. I didn't know if he wanted to add on to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little piece to kind of get back to the more fundamental question from Commissioner Hirsch about what sort of is within the discretion on this sort of approval. And to that, we look to the city's municipal code at section 16.20.050 that lays out the findings that would be necessary to deny a map such as this one. And so here, that's really where you'd kind of have to find one of those findings applies to support a denial. And here, as Mr. Tilley outlined, there's not really a basis based on the consistency of the project as it's been proposed with all of the applicable planning documents. So that's all I wanted to add to that.
Thank you for that clarification. That's helpful. The Commissioner Lockhart.
Thank you, Chair Sablon. This is indirectly related to this item. We received public comment, just after 5 this evening after it closed, and I'm sensitive to how the community feels about this, and so I was wondering if maybe we could change the timeline of when commissioners receive public comment. I mean, by 5 o'clock, I had already read the entire packet, and was trying to make last-minute preparations before the meeting, and so it just would have benefited my decision making if I had a little bit more time to consider the public comment submitted. I just wanted to offer that up.
Mr. Tilley, do we have any discretion on that? As I do agree with Commissioner Lockhart. It's a bit tight. I know we want to allow the public as much time to get their comment in, but now with the ability to join by Zoom, I think if we could close the written public comment, maybe 48 hours before or something, and then if they're not in by then, they could join the Zoom meeting.
I would want our.
Unfortunately, we can't limit the comments in that way.
Okay.
That's what I thought he was going to say. So I mean, it does happen, you know, where we will get comments, you know, very late, and sometimes, you know, when people would come to present at a meeting, even on Zoom, they can just come and present it in real time. So it is something that we have to learn to adjust, and just, you know, and if people provide, you know, very substantive comments, you know, sometimes we might ask for a hearing to be continued so that we can evaluate those comments and provide a response. In this case, they did come in late, and we did review them as much as we could, but this sometimes will happen where you will get something late, and it's, and I tell, you know, folks a lot that, you know, if you sort of send something in last minute, it's your prerogative, but it can be very difficult for the Planning Commission to digest those comments, you know, with little to no time to spare. But it is their prerogative to submit comments really whenever anybody wants. But admittedly, in real world, if they come in 5 minutes before the meeting starts, it's going to be difficult to digest them.
Certainly. Thank you. So if someone were to submit public comments earlier, would we have received them earlier? Are we sent them as they come in, or are we sent them when public comment closes?
No, we try to relay comments to you when we get them, and once we triage them somewhat. I know there was at least one or two that came in fairly late today, so there was not a lot of time to, you know, for anyone to consider them. But we still want to accept public comment is to the extent we possibly can, recognizing just the practical limit of it can take some time to digest some of those comments.
Thank you for striking that balance.
Thank you. And Commissioner Esquivel?
Yeah, I want to just also express my appreciation for those that provided public comment, even if it was this late, just being able to get it. And thank you for the staff for turning it around as soon as you receive them. But I did want to know, and I'm not sure whether or not this was a requirement or something that was needed, but as part of the public comment, we heard from the applicant that they're going to be providing a trail connection from the Village Parkway to the new levee trail. And so I just want to express my appreciation for that acknowledgement as we continue to invest in our trails around our city. And again, I'm not sure whether or not that was a requirement for them as part of this development, but really grateful to see that on there.
Thank you. And I'm not seeing any other hands up. I don't know if anyone is ready to make a motion on this. Commissioner Hirsch.
You're muted.
Oh, thank you. I was going to say, you know, in terms of deliberation, I don't think I'm quite ready for a motion. I think that for me personally, and I understand that, you know, it might just be me, but I'm still absorbing a lot about this and would love to learn more about the Parks Master Plan. And so, you know, for me, I may be leaning towards alternative 3 to continue the items so that we can get additional information, understanding that, you know, commissioners may feel more comfortable otherwise, but I wanted to express where I'm leaning at in terms of deliberation.
Commissioner Lockhart.
Thank you, Chair Sablon. I have a question for the I'm looking at attachment 1 in the agenda report. I'm wondering about the little piece of land just below the treetop park across from this project. Are there plans for that piece of land? What will that be?
The piece of land across Village Parkway from the park, is that what you're talking about?
It's right at the corner of Lake Washington and Village Parkway, but not where the current park is.
Oh, okay. That's still part of the park area and will be developed at a further time. I don't have off the top of my head what's in the parks master plan for that portion of it, but it will be programmed at some point in the future.
So that won't be developed with housing. The plans for that are to keep that as recreation space?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So, I'm not seeing any other hands up. I don't know how the other commissioners are leaning on this. I think Mr. Tilley gave us a good overview of, we can't really force a new park here because it's not designated for that. And what we're really looking at this point is what they're proposing for their development. And, I think it is a good idea to certainly look at the Parks Master Plan for the overall plan for the city. But I don't think that can change the decision we have to make today. So those are my thoughts on that. Commissioner Hirsch.
Thanks, Chair Sablan. And just to clarify, because that was sort of the reasoning behind one of the questions I asked early on in this presentation about this property being zoned in the general plan as low density residential and whether park space is appropriate as an allowable use or permitted use. So just to clarify for the commission, Mr. Tilley, is that something that we can consider as an alternative? Or is it simply the applicant is showing us their plan and we, vote yes without any changes to it?
Well, it's not quite that, black and white. You don't have to accept their proposal, at face value necessarily. These projects go through a lot of evaluation to get to where we are now. Any decision like that, would be a nexus needed. You mentioned the 5 acres per 1,000 population. So I think this project has 57 lots, and so if you assume 2.5 to 3 people per house, you're looking at about 150 some people. So 5 acres per 1,000. I'm starting to get to the point where that's math beyond I can do in my head, but you'd be talking about something very small. And then also there's the practical part of our Parks Department is trying to get away from mini parks and things of that nature because they're very expensive to maintain, and they don't really offer any programming opportunities either. So for the most part, we'd be looking at a park in the neighborhood of needing to be 3 to 5 acres, at a minimum, sort of for a neighborhood park. And we certainly don't have that opportunity, here on this particular site. So there are more parks in the master plan. I know another project has a large one proposed a little bit south of here along Village Parkway, south of Linden. That would be big enough to host the baseball fields and soccer fields and things of that nature. That's a project that you may see later this year come before you. So there are things in the works in this particular arena. This is just not the site that's identified or really kind of practical for any type of full-blown park, especially with those types of improvements. So hence our recommendation for the commission side.
That's very helpful, Mr. Tilley. And part of this is just educational for me. So, for example, not knowing that mini parks maybe have a disproportionate expense in terms of upkeeping them relative to their size. You know, my final question, if staff could pull up attachment 1, which is the vicinity map, so I can get a better understanding. And this goes to Commissioner Lockhart's question as well about the existing Heritage Oaks Park that are nearby. So looking at the oak trees, the right angle triangle next to it, that's yellow grass on this map, I think Ms. Allen was saying is also reserved for park space, if that's correct, but it's unknown what date that will be developed and what degree.
Yeah, the build out of that park is ongoing now. It's a sort of unique model of the public-private partnership with the operator of the ropes course there, who has funded a lot of those improvements that you see out there. I believe there's a parking lot that's going in, other improvements that are happening there. I think also what Commissioner Lockhart was referring to was along those trees along the south side of Lake Washington Boulevard. That's sort of where the cycle track has been proposed, since we have a lot of excess right-of-way on Lake Washington Boulevard. When that right-of-way was acquired many years ago, it was thought that Lake Washington would need to be ultimately a 6-lane road because it was going to keep going eastward and connect to a bridge over the river into Sacramento. That's been off the table since about 2000, but the right-of-way is out there and it's kind of no man's land right now. So it's an opportunity for a cycle track. And then once you come to the Lake Washington Village Parkway intersection, that's then keep going east. That's where the bike connection would be provided with this project, which will lead you right up to the levee, or to the O&M corridor of the levee, which then you could go north or south and then ultimately get up on top of the levee if you wish. So there is a lot in the works around here, and this is a piece of a larger puzzle that we're bringing before you tonight. But it is part of a larger sort of master planned area.
No, that's helpful. And of course, helpful to also understand this is a part of a larger puzzle. So I certainly appreciate all the work that's been done before I joined the commission. But, you know, looking at this map right now, you know, we look at what's currently the yellow fields north of the Heritage Oaks, but now, of course, that's fully developed homes. And looking at the parcel highlighted in red, I understand most of that's Newport Unit 12, which is already approved. And maybe you can answer my question, but I assume there's no park space or green space in Unit 12 either. So now we're building Unit 13 to fully build out the red space with additional homes. And it's my understanding, if you scroll down a little bit on the screen, that what is currently open fields there above the tree line on the east side of Village Parkway is going to be future homes. And what's currently open field on the west side of Village Parkway is going to be future homes. And to me, it appears that while we're looking at just a small piece of the puzzle today, and I understand that with Unit 13, in the broader context, we're looking at a sea of future homes without any additional park space. And that then gets to me, you know, Unit 13 on its own, like you said, Mr. Tilley, 57 homes, you know, maybe 150 individuals, and you know, the city's requirements for park acre per people isn't much there. But when you add up all of this additional homes, I think the numbers are getting pretty big at that point. And to know that there's no additional park space planned at that point, it just has me a little concerned.
Yeah, and the 5 acres per 1,000 is really a combination of neighborhood level parks at 2 acres per 1,000, and then community level parks at 3 acres per 1,000. So most areas will have a neighborhood park, but not everybody will have a community park, you know, immediately within their neighborhood. A community park, say being the size of Bright Park or Bridgeway Lakes Park, things like that, that are really meant to be sort of, you know, community-wide or almost city-wide, you know, usage and programming. Neighborhood parks, smaller, you know, less hardscape and formal improvements, a lot more neighborhood-oriented, accessed, you know, primarily by, you know, people that are, you know, within some, you know, proximity. But everything that's happening here, including these other projects you mentioned, south of Lake Washington Boulevard, are all part of the long-term, master plan that the city has had for Southport, really since the framework plan was done in the mid-1990s. And that has been carried forth into the general plan ever since. So what we're looking here tonight is really implementation of, in some ways, a couple of decades, worth of work to get to where we are now.
I appreciate that. And I understand the applicant, spent decades doing their part in building homes in compliance with that as well. So I really do appreciate, the applicant and the city. And I think this just comes to me personally, without having enough time to review the Parks Master Plan or the Southport Master Plan, for example, I lack the full understanding of how much park space and where the park space is meant to be. And that's why for me personally, and I understand that the commission may go a different way, but for me personally, I would be more comfortable continuing this so that we'd have more time to study. But that's just my thoughts.
Do any of the other commissioners have any thoughts on what direction they would like to go on this? Commissioner Steger?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I can appreciate Commissioner Hirsch and his perspective. I think also being new to the commission, I think you've shed some light on exactly, some additional studying and follow-up that is necessary to have a full understanding and to make these decisions correctly. And so I think I could definitely echo and share your sentiment on the possibility to continue this to a future meeting. But I just wanted to share my opinion. So thank you.
Commissioner Lockhart.
I would just appreciate some clarification from Commissioners Hirsch and Steiger about what would need to be studied to bring this back, and help me understand what more information that the commission would need before making a decision.
Yeah, I'd be happy, Commissioner Lockhart. For me, and I understand, the recommended action. So maybe it's taking a step back and going from what's recommended and where my belief and maybe having some more time to meet that would be. I know that the staff recommended action today is that, one, we certify that the General Plan 2035 EIR has fully analyzed the potential impacts for Newport Estates Unit 13 as proposed to us today. And just between everything that's been discussed, my relative lack of understanding of where the open space, the park space is intended to be, not just for Newport 13, but the general vicinity, I'm not quite sure that I can agree with attachment 7, which is, if I scroll to it, the staff's findings, environmental information supporting findings that the plan is within the scope of the general plan. And when I say that, I specifically mean on page 138 under the public services section and page 139 under the recreation section, the staff report says under impact analysis, the proposed project would primarily involve the creation of 60 single-family lots, 2 bike connector lots, and a remainder parcel, the creation of which would not substantially affect public services upon completion of the project. Public services, of course, being defined at the bottom of page 137 as available fire protection and emergency services, police protection services, and schools, parks, and libraries. So for me, it's really the park space, the green space, and not being sure And I do apologize, for making this more difficult than maybe it needs to be, but it just reflects my own desire to know more about the surrounding area, park space, green space.
One thing I'd like to point out, Commissioner Hirsch, is when this was originally approved as a master development in '98, it had about 5 acres of park space, which was actually expanded to a little over 8 acres. Originally, the area where the Oaks Grove is, part of it was actually supposed to have houses on it, and it was changed, I believe, in 2004, so that entire 8.5 acres then became a park space. So this project at Newport as a whole today actually has more park space than it was originally approved with back in the 90s.
No, thank you, Ms. Allen, and I certainly appreciate that. And maybe that goes to my question, because I know this project has taken over 20 years and a lot's changed in terms of the population size and population estimates. So the 5 acres of parks was the standard then when the agreement was first made in the 90s, but now we have a projected population of over 80,000 in 2035, according to the city's general plan. Is the developer required to also expand and adapt with the times when it comes to meeting that additional park space?
Well, that's
the developer has built out the project so that it meets the consistency with what was originally approved back in '98. So.
And they also have a development agreement for their project that, we must respect as well. The entirety of Newport Estates would have about 800 and change homes. So even at, 3 persons per household, 2,400 people, 5 acres per thousand, we're still needing less than 10 acres of parkland, and there's already 8 across the road within the Heritage Oaks Park. And then even the Whitey Bosclair Park, for a little further down Lake Washington, was part of some of the Newport area too. So in our estimation, the parkland that's part of the master plan and which is driven by our planned growth, how much parks we're going to have, has been, to the large extent satisfied, in this area.
No, I appreciate that. And I do apologize for being a thorn, maybe in people's sides. Again, it comes to me, I just have a personal discomfort without knowing the Parks Master Plan and without knowing the Southport Framework Plan, perhaps as well as others do. I have difficulty visualizing. And so I personally would rather continue this item, but I understand that I'm just one person and the commission may feel differently. So I don't want to get in the way of that. I think we're just sort of circling the drain now. So that's where I'm at in terms of deliberation.
Commissioner Escobar.
Yeah, I'm sensitive to the understanding of parks being available, especially with new developments taking place. But I think at this point, I'm feeling comfortable with the work that the staff and the developer have done in order to move forward and their due diligence from where they had to start from the very beginning and where the plans began back in the 90s. So at this point, I feel comfortable moving forward with the staff recommendation to approve.
Yeah, so I think at this point we would need, whether it's a motion to approve staff recommendation or a motion to continue. I think we're just kind of at a standstill at this point. So
I'm happy to make the motion to approve the staff recommendation.
we have a motion to approve staff recommendation.
Chair Sablon, does that include the 3 conditions that were changed in the memo?
Oh, thank you, Ms. Allen. So Commissioner Esquivel, can you clarify that if the motion to approve staff recommendation with the changes in the memorandum?
Can you direct me to where that is again? Sorry, I have two papers.
It was the email we got at,
I
think 11:46 a.m.
I think maybe and I don't know if this was something that was provided to the public either, was provided to the public as well when we got this as a separate email. Is there an opportunity for the staff to be able to summarize the memo that we received for transparency purposes?
Candido, was that something in your bailiwick?
The summarization of the conditions?
Yeah, I believe those were engineering related conditions.
Yes, the one condition was stricken. I don't have the memo in front of me. Ben, can you put the memo up on the screen?
And what it appears to me is that it's trying to be ADA compliant.
Okay, so condition 58 was stricken. It was originally thought by development engineering that the trail needed to be 60 feet wide. However, after discussions with the Parks Director, it was determined that the minimum width actually needed was 45 feet. And that is also consistent with what's in the Southport Framework Plan. And so that's why condition 60 was stricken. Condition 59 had the word monolithic stricken from it. What that refers to is that would have been development where there is just sidewalk and no planter strip, what we call a landscape strip. So this project actually does have the landscape strip, and so it was asked that that word monolithic be stricken so that the wording is consistent. And they also changed condition 61 to add the condition that the cul-de-sacs are exempt, and that's because of the way the radius in front of the homes with the cul-de-sacs are, that most of them would not have the minimum 21 feet. So that was why development engineering exempted them from those.
Thank you, Ms. Allen.
Thank you. And I guess it kind of looks to me, this was the discussion between the developer and the development engineering staff, which and I might be wrong here, but it sounds to be more technical in nature.
The developer and development engineering did discuss these conditions, and they are in concurrence with them.
And so I think with that, Commissioner Esquivel, do you want to amend your motion to include these changes as reflected in the memo?
Yeah, so, and I don't know if this is the proper terminology of it, but I guess I would like to make a motion to approve the staff recommendation that incorporates the changes seen on the memo provided.
Is there a second for the motion?
I'll second.
Commissioner Middleman seconds. Okay. Mr. Mierzwa, can you do a roll call, please?
Commissioner Middleman?
Aye.
Commissioner Esquivel?
Aye.
Commissioner Lockhart?
Aye.
Commissioner Steger?
Aye.
Commissioner Hirsch?
Abstain?
Chair Saban?
Aye. Thank you. With that, the motion carries. And we will move on to part 2, administration function. We have any informal discussion with the commissioners? So I do have one thing. I do appreciate Commissioners Hirsch and Commissioner Steger's thoughts on the park master plan. So I don't know if that's something we can add to maybe an info item at some point in the future. Just if we could have someone from Parks maybe do an overview and the interplay with the Planning Commission's role with that.
Yeah, I think that would dovetail well. I am planning to do something about our general plan, an overview of that at one of our, next 1 or 2 meetings. So that might set a good foundation and for things such as the Parks Master Plan, which is really how stuff in the general plan is implemented. It's a more of a refinement for what's in the general plan. So I'll provide the Parks Master Plan to everyone to review at their leisure. But I would propose that I start with the general plan overall, which does account for parks, but again, on a sort of 30,000 foot level. And then we can then do a deeper dive, from there, if that would please the commission.
Yeah, I think that sounds good to me, at least. But yeah, anything else from the commissioners? Seeing no hands, I think we will adjourn today's meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, commissioners. Have a good evening.
You. Have a good night.
Take care, everyone.
David, can you stick around for 2 minutes?
Yes.